The afternoon sun was getting lower as 17-year-old Tyler walked down Maple Street, his backpack heavy with textbooks and his work shirt still smelling like the cleaning supplies from the grocery store. It had been another long day that started at 6 in the morning with school, followed immediately by his 4-hour shift stocking shelves and helping customers. His mom always told him that hard work builds character, but right now all Tyler wanted was to get home, heat up some leftover pizza, and maybe catch up on his history homework. As he turned the corner onto his street, something caught his attention. There in the front yard of the small blue house 3 doors down from his own was Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who lived alone. She was standing on what looked like a very unstable wooden chair, reaching up toward the porch light fixture above her front door. Tyler could see her wobbling slightly, and his heart skipped a beat. Tyler had seen Mrs. Chen around the neighborhood for years, but they had never really talked much. She was one of those neighbors who kept to herself, always polite with a small nod when they passed each other on the sidewalk, but never stopping for conversation. He knew she had lived in that house for decades, long before his family moved to the street when he was just 8 years old. The old woman was stretching her arm as far as she could reach, trying to unscrew what appeared to be a burnt-out light bulb. The chair beneath her was definitely not meant for standing on. It was one of those old wooden dining chairs with a curved back, and every time she reached higher, it rocked back and forth dangerously. Tyler stopped walking and watched for a moment, feeling his stomach tighten with worry. Mrs. Chen had to be at least 75 years old, maybe older. Her gray hair was tied back in a neat bun, and she was wearing a floral house dress and slippers that definitely were not made for balancing on furniture. The whole situation looked like an accident waiting to happen. He glanced around the street, hoping to see another adult who might help, but it was that quiet time of afternoon when most people were still at work or inside their houses. The street was empty except for a few parked cars and the usual stray cat that liked to sleep under the Johnson's truck. Tyler took a deep breath and walked toward Mrs. Chen's yard. As he got closer, he could hear her muttering to herself in what sounded like frustration, mixed with determination. She was holding onto the light fixture with one hand and trying to twist the bulb with the other, but it was clear she couldn't get a good grip while also trying to balance on the wobbly chair. "Excuse me, Mrs. Chen," Tyler called out softly, not wanting to startle her and cause her to fall. She looked down at him with surprise, her weathered face showing a mixture of embarrassment and wariness. Her dark eyes, magnified slightly by her wire-rimmed glasses, studied him for a moment before she spoke. "Oh, hello there," she said, her voice carrying just a hint of an accent that Tyler had noticed before, but never really paid attention to. "I'm just trying to change this bulb. It went out last night and I can't see to get my keys in the door when it gets dark." Tyler could see that she was gripping the chair tightly now, probably realizing how unstable her situation was. Her knuckles were white where she held onto the back of the chair, and there was a slight tremor in her hands that could have been from the awkward position or maybe just age. "That chair doesn't look very safe," Tyler said gently. "Would you like me to help you with that?" Mrs. Chen hesitated, and Tyler could see the internal debate playing out on her face. She was clearly struggling with the task, but she was also from a generation that valued independence and self-reliance. Plus, Tyler realized she probably didn't know him very well, even though they had been neighbors for almost 10 years. "I don't want to be a bother," she said finally. "I've been managing just fine on my own for years." "It's no bother at all," Tyler replied, setting his backpack down on her front walkway. "I'm tall enough to reach it without needing a chair, and it'll just take a minute." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because Mrs. Chen nodded slowly and began to carefully climb down from the chair. Tyler immediately stepped forward, offering his arm for support. Her grip was surprisingly strong, and he could feel how relieved she was to have solid ground under her feet again. "Thank you," she said, smoothing down her dress and adjusting her glasses. "I suppose I'm not as young as I used to be. That bulb has been flickering for weeks, and when it finally went out completely yesterday, I knew I had to do something about it." Tyler looked up at the light fixture. It was definitely higher than Mrs. Chen could have reached safely, even with a better ladder. The burnt-out bulb was one of those old-fashioned ones, probably from before LED lights became common. "Do you have a replacement bulb?" Tyler asked. Mrs. Chen's face fell slightly. "Oh dear. I was so focused on getting the old one out I forgot I don't have a new one yet. I was planning to go to the hardware store tomorrow." Tyler thought for a moment. Actually, I think we might have some extras at my house. My mom always keeps a few different types on hand. Let me go check real quick. Before Mrs. Chen could protest, Tyler jogged the short distance to his own house. His mom wasn't home yet from her job at the insurance office, but he knew exactly where she kept the household supplies. In the utility closet, he found a package of bulbs that looked like they would fit Mrs. Chen's fixture. When he returned, Mrs. Chen was sitting on her front porch steps, looking much more relaxed now that she wasn't balancing precariously on furniture. She smiled when she saw him coming back with the bulb. "You really didn't have to do all this," she said as Tyler positioned himself under the light fixture. "My mom always says we should look out for our neighbors," Tyler replied, reaching up to unscrew the dead bulb. It came out easily once he could get a proper grip on it. Besides, it's getting dark earlier these days and everyone should have a working porch light. As he screwed in the new bulb, Tyler could sense Mrs. Chen watching him carefully. When he was finished, he stepped back and looked up at her. "Would you like to test it to make sure it works?" Mrs. Chen stood up and went to her front door, flipping the switch just inside. The new bulb immediately cast a warm, bright light over her porch and front yard. "Perfect," she said, and Tyler could hear real gratitude in her voice. "Thank you so much, young man." "I don't think I ever properly introduced myself." "I'm Helen Chen." "I'm Tyler," he replied, picking up his backpack. "I live in the White House with the red door." "Well, Tyler, I really appreciate your help today. You probably saved me from a trip to the emergency room." Tyler smiled and started to head toward his own house, but Mrs. Chen called after him. "Tyler, wait. Would you like some cookies? I made snickerdoodles yesterday and I have far too many for just one person." The offer was tempting, especially since Tyler was always hungry after work. But he could see his mom's car pulling into their driveway, and he knew she would want to hear about his day. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Chen, but I should get home. Maybe another time." "Of course," she said with a warm smile. "And Tyler, thank you again. It's nice to know there are still good people in the world." As Tyler walked the rest of the way home, he felt a warm feeling in his chest that had nothing to do with the mild October weather. It felt good to help someone, and even better to know that his small act of kindness had made Mrs. Chen's day a little easier and safer. Tyler was sprawled across his bed the next afternoon, trying to make sense of his chemistry homework when he heard the knock at the front door. It wasn't the casual rap of a friend or the gentle tap of a neighbor. This was the kind of firm, official knock that made his stomach drop even before he knew why. He heard his mom's footsteps crossing the living room, then the sound of the door opening. The voices that followed made Tyler's blood run cold. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Officer Rodriguez and this is Officer Johnson. We're here because we received a complaint about a possible break-in attempt at a residence on this street." Tyler's mom, Diana, had that particular tone in her voice that he recognized from years of experience. It was the careful, overly polite way she spoke to authority figures when she was trying to stay calm, but was actually worried sick. "I'm sorry, officers, but I think there must be some mistake. No one in this house has been involved in anything like that. We're just following up on a report, ma'am. Could we speak with your son, Tyler? We understand he's 17 years old, about 6 feet tall, African American." Tyler's heart was pounding now. He quietly closed his textbook and crept to his bedroom door, which was slightly open. From there, he could see down the hallway to where his mom stood in the doorway, and beyond her to the front porch where the 2 police officers waited. Standing between the officers was Mrs. Chen, but she looked completely different from the grateful, friendly woman he had helped just 24 hours earlier. Her face was stern and worried, and she was clutching a small notebook against her chest like it contained evidence of some terrible crime. "Tyler," his mom called, her voice carefully controlled. "Could you come here, please?" Tyler's legs felt shaky as he walked down the hallway. He had been raised to respect police officers, but he also knew from watching the news and hearing stories from friends and family that interactions with law enforcement could go wrong quickly, especially for young B. Lack men like himself. When he reached the front door, Officer Rodriguez nodded at him politely. The officer was middle-aged with graying hair and kind eyes, which made Tyler feel slightly less panicked. "Tyler, we're investigating a report of suspicious activity that happened yesterday evening around 6:30. Were you in the neighborhood around that time?" "Yes, sir," Tyler answered honestly. "I was walking home from work." Mrs. Chen suddenly stepped forward, pointing directly at Tyler. "That's him. That's the young man I saw messing around my house yesterday." Tyler's mouth fell open. He looked at Mrs. Chen in complete confusion. "Mrs. Chen, I helped you change your light bulb, remember? You thanked me and offered me cookies." But Mrs. Chen was shaking her head vigorously. "I did no such thing. I've never seen you before in my life until yesterday when I caught you tampering with my electrical fixtures." Officer Johnson, a younger man with a serious expression, took out a notepad. "Ma'am, can you tell us exactly what you witnessed?" Mrs. Chen opened her small notebook and began reading from it, her voice shaking slightly. "Yesterday at approximately 6:30 in the evening, I observed this young man standing in my front yard, reaching up toward my porch light. When he saw me watching from my window, he quickly walked away toward that house there." She pointed at Tyler's house. "But Mrs. Chen," Tyler said desperately, "you weren't watching from the window. You were standing on a chair trying to change the bulb yourself. You almost fell and I helped you down, sunk." "That's completely ridiculous." Mrs. Chen's voice was getting higher and more agitated. "I would never do something so dangerous, and I certainly would have remembered if someone had helped me." Tyler felt like he was in some kind of nightmare. How could Mrs. Chen not remember what had happened? It had been less than 24 hours ago, and she had been so grateful. She had even introduced herself properly and offered him homemade cookies. His mom stepped closer to him, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the officers. "Tyler, just tell them exactly what happened." Taking a deep breath, Tyler explained the entire interaction from the day before. He described how he had seen Mrs. Chen wobbling on the unstable chair, how he had offered to help, how he had gone to his own house to get a replacement bulb, and how she had thanked him afterward. Officer Rodriguez was taking notes, but Tyler could see skepticism in his expression. Meanwhile, Mrs. Chen was becoming more and more upset. "Officers, I'm telling you, nothing like that happened. This young man is making up stories to cover up whatever he was really doing in my yard. And that's not all." She flipped through her notebook frantically. "When I got up this morning, things in my house had been moved around. My jewelry box was in a different spot on my dresser, and some papers on my kitchen table had been shuffled through." Tyler's heart sank even further. Now Mrs. Chen was suggesting that he had somehow been inside her house, which was absolutely not true. "Ma'am," Officer Johnson asked Mrs. Chen, "are you saying that items were stolen?" "Well, no," Mrs. Chen admitted. "But things were definitely disturbed. It's like someone was looking through my belongings, planning to come back later when I wasn't home." Officer Rodriguez turned back to Tyler. "Son, after you allegedly helped Mrs. Chen with her light bulb, did you go inside her house for any reason?" "No, sir, absolutely not," Tyler replied firmly. "I never went inside her house. I helped her change the bulb. She thanked me. She offered me cookies, and I went home because I saw my mom getting home from work." Mrs. Chen was shaking her head again. "Officers, I'm 78 years old, but my memory is perfectly fine. I know what happened and what didn't happen. This young man was up to no good, and I want him to stay away from my property." Tyler felt tears of frustration building up behind his eyes. He had only been trying to help, and now he was being accused of attempted burglary. The worst part was that Mrs. Chen seemed to genuinely believe her version of events. She wasn't lying on purpose. She really seemed to remember things completely differently than they had actually happened. His mom placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Officers, my son has never been in any kind of trouble. He's a good student. He works part-time at Peterson's grocery, and he's always been taught to help others when he can. We understand this is a difficult situation," Officer Rodriguez said diplomatically, "but we have to take all reports seriously." More neighbors were starting to notice the commotion. Tyler could see Mr. and Mrs. Patterson from across the street, peeking through their front window, and old Mr. Wilson from next door was pretending to check his mailbox while obviously listening to every word. Tyler's face burned with embarrassment. He had lived on this street for almost 10 years, and now everyone would think he was some kind of criminal. The good reputation he had built up through years of being respectful and helpful was crumbling in a matter of minutes. Officer Johnson looked up from his notepad. "Tyler, would you be willing to come with us to talk more about this at the station, just to get a complete statement?" Tyler's mom immediately stepped forward. "Officers, my son is a minor. If you want to question him further, I'm going to need to call our lawyer first." The word lawyer seemed to hang in the air, making everything feel more serious and scary. Tyler had never needed a lawyer before. He had never even had a detention at school, let alone been suspected of a crime. Mrs. Chen was clutching her notebook tighter now, and Tyler could see that her hands were shaking. She looked frightened and confused, but also absolutely certain that Tyler was a threat to her safety. "I just want to feel safe in my own home," she said quietly. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 32 years and I've never had problems like this before." Officer Rodriguez closed his notepad and looked at Tyler seriously. "Son, we're going to need you to stay away from Mrs. Chen's property while we investigate this matter further. Do you understand?" Tyler nodded miserably. "Yes, sir. And Mrs. Chen, we recommend that you make sure all your doors and windows are locked, and consider having a family member check on you regularly." After the officers and Mrs. Chen left, Tyler and his mom stood in their doorway watching them walk back toward Mrs. Chen's house. The afternoon that had started so normally with homework and thoughts of dinner was now completely ruined. "Mom, I swear I was only trying to help her," Tyler said, his voice cracking slightly. Diana wrapped her arm around her son's shoulders. "I believe you, baby. We'll figure this out. But right now, you need to understand how serious this is. Even if it's all a misunderstanding, we have to be very careful about how we handle it." As they went back inside and closed the door, Tyler couldn't stop thinking about the fear and confusion he had seen in Mrs. Chen's eyes. Something was definitely wrong, but he had no idea how to prove that he had been trying to help rather than harm. The questioning continued right there on Tyler's front porch, and with each passing minute the situation grew more tense. More neighbors had started to gather, some pretending to work in their yards while others stood openly on their own porches, watching the drama unfold. Tyler could feel their stares like physical weight on his shoulders. Officer Johnson flipped to a new page in his notepad and looked at Mrs. Chen. "Ma'am, you mentioned that things in your house had been moved around. Can you be more specific about what exactly was disturbed?" Mrs. Chen nodded eagerly, happy to have someone taking her concerns seriously. She opened her small notebook again, and Tyler could see that it was filled with neat handwriting in blue ink. "This morning when I woke up, the first thing I noticed was that my jewelry box on the bedroom dresser had been moved about 3 inches to the left. I always keep it in the exact same spot, right next to my late husband's photograph." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, as if the act of recounting the details was convincing her even more of their truth. Tyler's mom squeezed his shoulder gently, a silent reminder to stay calm and let the officers do their job. "What else did you notice?" Officer Rodriguez asked, pen poised over his own notepad. "In the kitchen there were papers scattered on my table that I know I had left in a neat pile. Bills and letters that I organize every Sunday were all mixed up. And in the living room my television remote was on the wrong side of the coffee table." Officer Johnson looked up from his writing. "Mrs. Chen, do you live alone?" "Yes, I've been living by myself since my husband passed away 4 years ago. My daughter lives across town, but she only visits on weekends usually." Tyler listened to this exchange with growing dread. He could see how the evidence was stacking up in Mrs. Chen's mind, creating a narrative that painted him as someone who had somehow gotten into her house and gone through her belongings. But he knew with absolute certainty that he had never been inside her home. "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez said gently, "is it possible that you might have moved these items yourself and simply forgotten?" Mrs. Chen's face flushed with indignation. "Officer, I may be 78 years old, but I am not senile. I know exactly how I keep my house, and I know when things have been disturbed." Tyler could see his mom wince slightly at Mrs. Chen's sharp tone. Diana had always taught Tyler to respect his elders, but this situation was becoming more complicated by the minute. Officer Johnson turned back to Tyler. "Can anyone verify your whereabouts yesterday evening after you allegedly helped Mrs. Chen?" "My mom got home from work right around 7 o'clock, Tyler said, looking at his mother for confirmation. "I was already inside doing homework when she came in." Diana nodded. "That's right. Tyler was at the kitchen table with his book spread out when I got home. We had dinner together and watched TV until about 10. But Mrs. Chen shook her head vigorously. "That doesn't prove anything. He could have come back later after dark when I was sleeping." Tyler felt a flash of anger at the unfairness of the accusation. "Mrs. Chen, why would I help you change your light bulb and then come back to break into your house? That doesn't make any sense. I'm telling you, no one helped me change any light bulb." Mrs. Chen's voice was rising now, and Tyler could see that she was getting more upset. "I replaced that bulb myself weeks ago." Officer Rodriguez held up his hand to calm everyone down. "Let's take a step back here. Mrs. Chen, can you show us this light bulb that was supposedly tampered with?" The small group walked over to Mrs. Chen's front porch, Tyler and his mom following reluctantly behind the officers. Tyler's heart was pounding as they approached the scene of what he knew had been a simple good deed just one day earlier. Mrs. Chen pointed up at the porch light, which was glowing brightly in the early evening dimness. As you can see, the light is working perfectly fine. I've been taking care of this house and maintaining it myself for years. Officer Johnson looked up at the fixture, then at Tyler. This is the light bulb you claim to have replaced yesterday? Yes, sir, Tyler replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The old one was burnt out and I got a replacement from our house. Mrs. Chen laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Officers, does this look like a burnt-out bulb to you? Tyler stared up at the light in confusion. It was definitely working, and it looked exactly like the bulb he had installed the day before. But Mrs. Chen was speaking about it as if it had been working perfectly all along. Ma'am, Officer Rodriguez said carefully, when was the last time you remember changing this particular light bulb? Mrs. Chen thought for a moment, consulting her notebook again. I replaced it myself about 3 weeks ago when the weather started getting cooler, and the days got shorter. I always make sure my porch light is working properly for safety reasons. Tyler felt like he was losing his mind. He knew what had happened yesterday. He could still picture Mrs. Chen wobbling on that unstable chair, could still remember the gratitude in her voice when she thanked him. But she was describing a completely different reality. By now, quite a crowd had gathered. The Hendersons from 2 houses down were standing at the edge of Mrs. Chen's yard, whispering to each other. Mrs. Davis from across the street had come out with her teenage daughter, both of them staring openly at the scene. Tyler recognized several other neighbors who had known him since he was a little kid, and the looks on their faces ranged from curiosity to suspicion. Officer Johnson pulled Officer Rodriguez aside for a quiet conversation. Tyler couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see them glancing back at him and Mrs. Chen as they spoke. After a few minutes, Officer Rodriguez returned to the group. Tyler, I need to ask you some direct questions, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Tyler nodded, his mouth dry with nervousness. Did you, at any time yesterday or today, enter Mrs. Chen's house without her permission? No, sir. Absolutely not. Did you touch or move any of her belongings either inside or outside her house? No, sir. The only thing I touched was the light bulb that I helped her replace. Have you ever been inside Mrs. Chen's house for any reason? No, sir. Yesterday was actually the first time I'd ever had a real conversation with her. Officer Rodriguez nodded and turned to Mrs. Chen. Ma'am, I have to ask, is it possible that you're mistaken about what happened yesterday? Memory can sometimes play tricks on us, especially when we're under stress or not feeling well. Mrs. Chen's face darkened. Officer, I resent the implication that I don't know what happened in my own front yard. I saw what I saw and I know what I know. This young man was acting suspiciously around my property, and now my house has been disturbed. I don't think it's a coincidence. Tyler's mom finally spoke up, her voice steady but firm. Officers, I think we need to consider that there might be some confusion here. My son has never been in trouble with the law. He's on the honor roll at school. He works part-time to help with family expenses, and he volunteers at our church on weekends. This accusation is completely out of character for him. But Mrs. Chen wasn't backing down. I don't care about his grades or his job. All I know is what I witnessed with my own eyes, and I have the right to feel safe in my own home. The weight of the situation was starting to hit Tyler fully. He realized that even if the officers didn't arrest him today, this incident would follow him around the neighborhood. People would always wonder if maybe there was some truth to Mrs. Chen's story. The trust and respect he had built up over years of being a good kid could be destroyed, and one afternoon Officer Johnson closed his notepad and looked at both Tyler and Mrs. Chen. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to file a report about this incident, and we're going to recommend that Tyler stays away from Mrs. Chen's property while we look into this further. What does that mean exactly? Diana asked, her protective instincts fully engaged. It means that Tyler shouldn't walk past Mrs. Chen's house, shouldn't go into her yard for any reason, and shouldn't attempt to contact her. Officer Rodriguez explained. It's just a precaution while we sort this out. Tyler felt tears of frustration threatening to spill over. But I live on this street. Her house is between mine and the bus stop. How am I supposed to get to school? You'll have to take a different route, Officer Johnson said matter-of-factly. Walk around the block if you have to. The unfairness of it all was overwhelming. Tyler was being punished for trying to help someone, and there seemed to be nothing he could do to prove his innocence. Mrs. Chen's version of events was so different from reality that it felt like they were talking about two completely different incidents. As the officers prepared to leave, Mrs. Chen turned to look at Tyler one more time. For just a moment, he thought he saw something flicker in her eyes, a brief flash of uncertainty or confusion. But then her expression hardened again. "I hope you understand how serious this is, young man," she said sternly. "I won't tolerate anyone threatening my safety or security." After everyone had dispersed and Tyler and his mom were back inside their house, the full impact of what had just happened began to sink in. Tyler slumped down on the living room couch, feeling emotionally drained. Just as Officer Rodriguez was about to close his notepad and wrap up the investigation, a silver Honda Civic pulled quickly into Mrs. Chen's driveway. A woman in her early 50s jumped out, her face flushed with worry and her work clothes slightly rumpled as if she had left in a hurry. "Mom? Mom, what's going on here?" the woman called out as she hurried toward the group gathered on the front porch. Mrs. Chen's entire demeanor changed when she saw her daughter. The stern, accusatory expression softened into something that looked almost childlike. "Oh, Rebecca, thank goodness you're here. I called the police because that boy was trying to break into our house." Rebecca looked around at the officers, then at Tyler and his mother, clearly trying to piece together what was happening. She was a smaller, younger version of Mrs. Chen, with the same delicate features but worry lines around her eyes that suggested she'd been dealing with stress for a while. "Officers, I'm Rebecca Chen Martinez, Helen's daughter. She called me at work about an hour ago, very upset, saying someone was trying to break in. I left immediately." She turned to her mother with gentle concern. "Mom, can you tell me exactly what happened?" Mrs. Chen began recounting her story again, but Rebecca's expression grew more and more troubled as she listened. Tyler could see recognition dawning in the daughter's eyes, and it wasn't the kind of recognition that supported her mother's version of events. "Mom," Rebecca said softly, interrupting the story, "let's go look at this light bulb you're talking about." They all moved toward the porch light again. Rebecca stood directly under it, studying the fixture carefully. "Mom, this bulb looks brand new, and it's a different type than the ones you usually buy." Mrs. Chen looked up at the light, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, Tyler saw uncertainty creep into her expression. I always buy the same bulbs at Palmer's Hardware," Mrs. Chen said slowly. "I know you do, Mom. You buy those compact fluorescent ones because they last longer, but this is a regular incandescent bulb." Rebecca's voice was gentle but firm. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward. "Ma'am, are you saying you think someone did change this bulb?" Rebecca nodded slowly, but her expression was complicated. "Officers, I need to be honest with you about something. My mother has been having some memory issues lately. Nothing major, but little things. Forgetting where she put her keys, not remembering conversations we had the day before." Mrs. Chen's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Rebecca, you're making it sound like I'm losing my mind." "I'm not, Mom, but you have to admit you've been confused about some things lately." Rebecca turned to the officers. "Could I please speak with you privately for just a moment?" The officers nodded and stepped away with Reb. Eka leaving Tyler, his mother, and Mrs. Chen standing awkwardly together. Mrs. Chen wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, and Tyler could see that she was becoming more agitated by the minute. After a few minutes of quiet conversation, Rebecca and the officers returned to the group. Rebecca's eyes were red as if she had been fighting back tears. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Do you remember yesterday being particularly difficult? You called me at work in the morning because you couldn't find your reading glasses." Mrs. Chen nodded reluctantly. "Yes, but I found them later. They were in the refrigerator for some reason." "Right. And then you called me again around noon because you couldn't remember if you had taken your blood pressure medication. That was just one day." "Rebecca, everyone has days like that." Rebecca took her mother's hands gently. "Mom, let's go inside and look at those things you said were moved around." The group moved into Mrs. Chen's house, which was neat and tidy but definitely showed signs of someone living alone and perhaps struggling with organization. There were sticky notes on various surfaces, reminder notes about appointments and medications. Rebecca led them to the bedroom first. where the jewelry box sat on the dresser exactly as Mrs. Chen had described, about 3 inches to the left of where she claimed it should be, next to a framed photograph of an elderly man. "Mom, show me where you think the jewelry box should be." Mrs. Chen pointed to a spot directly next to the photograph. Rebecca carefully moved the jewelry box to that position, and immediately it was clear why it had been moved. There was a water ring on the dresser's surface where a glass had obviously been sitting. "Mom, you had a glass of water here when you went to bed last night, remember? You moved the jewelry box so you'd have room for the glass." Mrs. Chen stared at the water ring for a long moment, and Tyler could see confusion washing over her face. They moved to the kitchen next, where papers were indeed scattered across the table. But as Rebecca sorted through them, it became clear that they weren't bills and letters as Mrs. Chen had claimed. They were grocery store coupons, crossword puzzles from the newspaper, and what appeared to be several attempts at writing the same grocery list. "Mom, you were working on your shopping list yesterday, remember? You called me to ask if I needed anything from the store." The final stop was the living room where the television remote was supposedly in the wrong place. Rebecca picked it up from the coffee table and looked at her mother. "Mom, where do you usually keep this?" Mrs. Chen pointed to the other side of the table, but then her face crumpled with uncertainty. I thought maybe I moved it when I was watching the news last night." Officer Rodriguez cleared his throat gently. "Ma'am, is it possible that you moved these items yourself and simply forgot?" The silence that followed was painful to witness. Mrs. Chen looked around her own living room as if she was seeing it for the first time, confusion and fear evident in her expression. Rebecca sat down next to her mother on the couch and took her hand. "Mom, I think you need to see Dr. Patterson next week. We've talked about this before. But what about him?" Mrs. Chen pointed at Tyler, though her voice lacked the conviction it had held earlier. "I saw him doing something to my light." Tyler finally found his voice. "Mrs. Chen, I really was trying to help you. You were standing on a chair that wasn't safe and I was worried you might fall. You thanked me afterward and offered me cookies." Mrs. Chen stared at Tyler for a long moment and something seemed to shift in her expression. "Cookies? I did make cookies yesterday, snickerdoodles." "That's right," Tyler said encouragingly. "You said you had made too many for just one person." For the first time since this ordeal began, Mrs. Chen's face showed a glimmer of recognition. "I remember making cookies," she said slowly. "And I remember the light being out. It was so dark I couldn't see to unlock my front door." Officer Johnson looked at Officer Rodriguez, and Tyler could see them communicating silently about how to proceed with this new information. Rebecca was fighting back tears now. "Mom, I think Tyler really was trying to help you. And I think you forgot about it because you've been having trouble remembering things lately." Mrs. Chen's whole body seemed to deflate as the reality of the situation sank in. She looked at Tyler with growing horror as she began to understand what she had done. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. Did I call the police on you for helping me?" Tyler nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. Mrs. Chen buried her face in her hands. "I'm so sorry. I'm so very sorry. I really thought I was so confused about what had happened." Officer Rodriguez closed his notepad definitively. "Well, I think we have a much clearer picture of what happened now. Tyler, it appears that you were indeed trying to help Mrs. Chen, and there was no criminal intent on your part." The relief that washed over Tyler was almost overwhelming, but it was mixed with sadness as he watched Mrs. Chen grapple with the realization that her memory had betrayed her so completely. Rebecca stood up and approached Tyler and his mother. "I am so incredibly sorry about all of this. My mother is a good person, but she's been struggling with some health issues that we're only just beginning to understand." Diana put a protective arm around Tyler's shoulders. "We understand that this wasn't intentional, but you have to realize how scary this was for my son." "I know, and I will make sure that everyone in the neighborhood knows what really happened here," Rebecca promised. As the officers prepared to leave, Officer Rodriguez turned to Tyler one more time. "Son, I want you to know that you did the right thing by helping your neighbor. Don't let this experience discourage you from being kind to others." But Tyler wasn't sure he believed that anymore. As he looked at Mrs. Chen, who was still sitting on her couch looking lost and frightened, he realized that sometimes even the best intentions could lead to terrible misunderstandings. The week following the incident passed slowly for Tyler. Even though the police had cleared up the misunderstanding, and Officer Rodriguez had assured him there would be no charges. Tyler found himself taking the long way to school every morning and avoiding his usual route past Mrs. Chen's house. The embarrassment of having neighbors witness his interrogation still burned in his chest, and he wasn't sure he was ready to face the curious stares and whispered conversations that seemed to follow him around the neighborhood. His mom had tried to convince him that people would forget about it quickly, but Tyler wasn't so sure. In a small community like theirs, stories had a way of sticking around, growing and changing with each retelling. He worried that some neighbors might always wonder if there had been some truth to Mrs. Chen's original accusation. On Wednesday afternoon, Tyler was walking home from his shift at the grocery store when he noticed a familiar silver Honda Civic parked in Mrs. Chen's driveway. Rebecca had been coming by every day since the incident, and Tyler had seen her helping her mother with various tasks around the house. He quickened his pace, hoping to get past without being noticed, but just as he reached the edge of the property, he heard his name being called. Tyler! Tyler, wait, please! He turned to see Rebecca hurrying toward him from her mother's front porch, carrying what looked like a wrapped plate in her hands. Behind her, moving more slowly but with determination, was Mrs. Chen herself. Tyler's first instinct was to keep walking, but his mother had raised him to be polite, especially to adults who were making an effort to speak with him. He stopped and waited, though his heart began beating faster as the two women approached. Mrs. Chen looked different than she had during the police incident. She was more carefully dressed, with her silver hair neatly styled and her makeup applied with obvious care. But more importantly, her expression was completely changed. Gone was the stern, suspicious look she had worn while accusing him. Instead, she looked nervous and deeply apologetic. Tyler, Rebecca began, my mother has something she'd like to say to you. We've spent a lot of time this week talking about what happened, and she wanted to apologize properly. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, clutching her hands together in front of her. Tyler, I owe you the biggest apology. I'm so ashamed of what I put you through. Tyler didn't know what to say, so he just nodded and waited for her to continue. I saw Dr. Patterson yesterday, and he confirmed what Rebecca has been trying to tell me for months. I'm in the early stages of something called mild cognitive impairment. It's not dementia exactly, but it means my memory isn't as reliable as it used to be. Her voice shook slightly as she spoke. I'm so sorry. Mrs. Chen, Tyler said softly, meaning it sincerely. The thing is, Mrs. Chen continued, bits and pieces have been coming back to me all week. I remember you being so patient and kind when you helped me down from that wobbly chair. I remember feeling grateful that someone your age would take the time to help an old woman. And I definitely remember making those snickerdoodles and wanting to share them with you. Rebecca held out the wrapped plate. Which brings us to this. Mom spent all morning making a fresh batch of snickerdoodles for you and your family. It was important to her to do something to try to make up for what happened. Tyler accepted the plate, feeling the warmth of fresh-baked cookies through the aluminum foil. The gesture meant more to him than he could express in words. There's more, Mrs. Chen said, reaching into her pocket and pulling out an envelope. I wrote you a letter. I wanted to put down in writing how sorry I am and how grateful I am for your kindness. I also wanted to explain to anyone who might ask that you were never doing anything wrong. You were just being a good neighbor. Tyler took the envelope, noting that his name was written on the front in the same neat handwriting he had seen in Mrs. Chen's notebook. Mrs. Chen, you really didn't have to do all this, Tyler said. I understand that you weren't feeling well and you were scared. But that's no excuse for what I put you through, Mrs. Chen replied firmly. Rebecca told me about all the neighbors who were watching when the police came. She said you looked mortified, and that breaks my heart. Rebecca nodded. We've actually been talking to some of the neighbors this week, explaining what really happened. Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Wilson both said they always knew you were a good kid and that there had to be some misunderstanding. This news was a relief to Tyler, though he was still embarrassed that the situation had required so much explanation and damage control. Tyler, Mrs. Chen continued, I need you to know that you shouldn't stop being kind just because of what happened with me. The world needs more young people like you, people who notice when others need help and aren't afraid to step in. Tyler felt his throat tighten with emotion. After a week of wondering if he should have just minded his own business and kept walking that afternoon, hearing Mrs. Chen say this meant everything to him. I also want you to know, Rebecca added, that Mom is going to be getting some help now. We're looking into having someone come check on her a few times a week, and I'm going to be visiting more regularly. She won't be trying to change light bulbs on unstable chairs anymore." Mrs. Chen smiled for the first time since Tyler had known her. "Though I hope if you ever see me doing something that looks dangerous, you'll still be willing to help, even after everything that's happened." "Of course I would," Tyler replied without hesitation. "There's one more thing," Rebecca said, glancing at her mother. "Mom wanted to invite you and your family over for dinner sometime soon. She makes an amazing pot roast and she thought it would be nice to get to know you properly under better circumstances." Tyler was touched by the invitation, though he wondered if his mom would be comfortable accepting it given everything that had happened. As if reading his thoughts, Mrs. Chen said, "I understand if your mother isn't ready for that yet. What I put your family through was traumatic, and trust takes time to rebuild, but the invitation is open whenever you're ready." Just then, Tyler's mom appeared at the end of their driveway, obviously having seen the conversation from their front window. She walked over to join them, her expression cautious but not unfriendly. "Hello, Mrs. Chen," Diana said politely. "How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you. Though I owe you an enormous apology as well," Mrs. Chen replied. "I can't imagine how frightening it must have been to see police officers at your door asking about Tyler." Diana nodded. "It was scary. But I understand now that you were confused and frightened too," Rebecca spoke up. "Mrs. Williams, we wanted to make sure you knew that we've spoken with Officer Rodriguez. He's going to make sure that this incident is properly documented as a misunderstanding. It won't appear on any kind of record that could affect Tyler in the future." This was news to both Tyler and his mom, and Tyler could see relief wash over his mother's face. "We also wanted to give you this," Mrs. Chen said, handing Diana a second envelope. "It's a letter explaining what really happened in case anyone ever asks or if Tyler needs it for any reason." Over the following weeks, Tyler gradually began taking his normal route to school again. The first few times he felt nervous walking past Mrs. Chen's house, but she was always ready with a smile and a wave when she saw him. Sometimes she would be working in her small front garden with Rebecca's help, and they would exchange friendly greetings. True to her word, Rebecca had spread the correct version of events throughout the neighborhood. Tyler found that instead of suspicious looks, he now received nods of approval from neighbors who had heard about his willingness to help an elderly resident in need. About a month after the incident, Tyler and his mom finally accepted Mrs. Chen's dinner invitation. The pot roast was indeed amazing, and Tyler learned that Mrs. Chen had been a teacher for 40 years before retiring. She shared stories about her late husband and her worries about getting older, while Rebecca talked about the challenges of helping a parent navigate health problems. It was during that dinner that Mrs. Chen made an observation that stuck with Tyler for a long time afterward. "You know, Tyler, what happened between us taught me something important about community. When I was younger, neighbors looked out for each other automatically. But somewhere along the way, we started becoming strangers living next to each other instead of people who cared about each other's well-being." She reached across the table and patted his hand gently. "What you did that day wasn't unusual 50 years ago. It was just what neighbors did. But now it's so rare that when someone like you comes along, it almost seems suspicious." Tyler had never thought about it that way, but Mrs. Chen's words made him realize that his simple act of kindness had been unusual enough to confuse someone who was already struggling with memory problems. "I hope," Mrs. Chen continued, "that our little misunderstanding doesn't discourage other people from helping when they see someone who needs it. The world needs more helpers, not fewer." As Tyler walked home that evening, he reflected on everything that had happened. The experience had been frightening and embarrassing, but it had also taught him something valuable about the importance of patience, understanding, and forgiveness. Mrs. Chen's courage in admitting her mistake and working to make things right had shown him what real character looked like. From that day forward, Tyler continued to help neighbors when he could, but he also made an effort to build relationships with people before crisis moments arrived. He started stopping to chat with Mrs. Chen when he saw her outside, and he got to know other elderly neighbors on his street as well. The incident that had started with a simple light bulb had ended up illuminating something much more important about human connection, community, and the power of understanding to heal even the most difficult misunderstandings.